Welcome to the Online Bodyguard podcast with host Philip Rindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse, a global threat and intelligence consultancy that blends psychology and intelligence to mitigate threats and risks to prominent people and brands.
Hello again and welcome to the Online Bodyguard with Philip Rindell from Diffuse. My guest today is Dr. Stephen White. Dr. Stephen White is somebody who I have watched for some time and read his material, and in fact very recently went on one of his 3-day workshops with another former guest and another friend, Reid Meloy. And he is at the very top of his game. But rather than introduce him, I'm going to ask Stephen to do that himself. So Stephen, can you welcome first and foremost. Can you tell us sort of your background? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure, and thanks for inviting me, Philip. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a psychologist. I'm licensed in California, and I've been consulting to organizations on violence risk issues for many years. I've been doing threat assessment work since the late 80s, actually, but I started my company, Work Trauma Services, in 1982 after I'd finished my postdoctoral work at UC San Francisco. And the way I got started was to provide trauma reduction interventions for organizations in the aftermath of serious incidents like a very serious bank robbery that left people traumatized, or industrial accidents, earthquake stress, which we're quite familiar with, things that affect everybody, and including how they feel at work and how they're able to work or not work. And I did a lot of that in the 1980s, and like some people in this field, I literally got dragged into workplace violence risk threat assessment work because employers were looking for help in situations where people were making threats, angry, were probably going to lose their job for either performance or conduct issues. And the employers were worried about how do we get out of this? How do we assess it objectively? And then how do we defuse this situation without making it worse, which is the real question when you're doing dynamic threat assessment with individuals where they're out there, they're non-incarcerated, they have jobs, they may have families, and there's a lot of information to gather as you consider what steps to take and what steps not to take. So anyway, that's how I got started, and we figured out that people needing help in organizational or university settings, that you needed certain key people involved. You needed security people or campus police. You needed human resource professionals. You needed the attorney to be in the room, and you needed assessment expertise. And of course, most organizations did not have that kind of expertise. Some of them do now. They have their own internal threat assessment professionals. They have their teams, their multidisciplinary teams, and huge organizations that are global may have a dozen professionals who screen threats. They may not be mental health professionals, but they're trained to identify, to look for the markers, the precursors, the warning signs, the risk factors that suggest somebody could be an actual risk. Getting started in organizational work, you got to get in. you got to find a way in. And way back in the early 80s, when I was doing this, I had a couple of colleagues who were already consulting to organizations, and I got invited to join in, and my company got started after a serious violent attack of a company in San Francisco. And I went in there and did the trauma work. And then once you get going, then the best referrals are word of mouth, and people are looking for help and all. And if you do good work, of course, and are responsible and know what you're talking about, you get invited in. And from those cases, we developed training modules, et cetera. But anyway, I've moved on to do threat work now, since, as I said, since about 1990 officially, and focused on that. And we have half a dozen or so consultants in our group who do this work and also do it globally as well.
So that's an interesting point. So you're not just operating in the US, you're operating across the world in lots of different environments and lots of different cultures.
Sure, because the major organizations, and we work for some very small organizations, a preschool. This is not fancy, but they can have problems with parents and outsiders. But, the large organizations, they're all global. With the internet age, everybody's got a global presence and customers all over the world and employees in various places. So, and there's, of course, cultural differences in the landscape for risk that organizations may face in different areas. I mean, the United States, sadly, is the world leader in mass attacks. The benefit of that, unfortunately, is that we've learned a lot. And I've done training in Europe and done virtual training in the Asia Pacific area as well. So there's some things you have to take into account. That it isn't as bad as it is in the United States in terms of our culture of seeking notoriety by attacking people with these grandiose attacks and all. And there isn't the gun culture in Europe that we have in the United States, which is a huge problem. There's just the access that people have who are not well put together and angry. But the fundamentals are the same in terms of people feeling humiliated, being angry, wanting to respond with revenge for that, and the mental factors that may contribute to violence, like severe paranoia combined with anger, can be a very serious combination, of course. And so it's not all that different, but there are differences that you have to take into account.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the questions that often comes up around, when I'm chatting to people around this subject matter in the UK is, okay, so a lot of the research, a lot of the kind of expertise is in the US, but that's because they have the guns and that's because they have these mass attacks and what have you. Does that still does that methodology still work in the UK, for instance, where we don't have that type of incident, thank God, but we do have knife attacks, we have other types of attacks, and we have just disruption.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You do have violence, of course, and there's the risk to public figures and the royal family, and it's the same methodology in terms of knowing those signs, and having a system to evaluate incidents or communications of concern. So. But there isn't the gun culture where somebody who's 20 years old can go in and buy an AR-15, but you have knife attacks and car attacks, and there's bombings, there's terrorist issues, of course. So, if you want to kill somebody bad enough, you'll figure out a way to do it. And there's just the lethality issue that we have because in the United States, because again, of those cultural and features with regard to guns and seeking notoriety, et cetera.
So we'll come to that in a moment, I think, because we're going to discuss obviously the methodology that you and Reid have created, and which I've obviously had the training on as well, which is incredible. But on a sort of larger subject then, so what are the problems that you solve? What do people come to you to solve?
Well, there's the undertow, or maybe call it the the obvious overt cultural landscape here, is that everybody is aware that the United States has a terrible problem with mass shootings. And so there's a great deal of vigilance. There's this two-sided coin. I don't want to believe this could happen in my organization, but I'm scared to death it could happen if something comes to their attention. So again, what employers or university officials or any work entity of any kind will be in a situation where someone is making threats to harm people. And threats are not very good predictors of what people are actually going to do. They're one indicator. You take them seriously, but somebody says, if you fire me, you'll be sorry. Okay, what the hell does he mean? Does he mean he's going to sue you? Does it mean he's going to post bad information about you, try to ruin your reputation? Does it mean he's going to attack you? So you start with what is the situation that comes to attention that the clientele asks for your help. We've got a situation. We want to get out of it safely. We can't tell if this guy really means it, or it looks like he really does mean it. So then it becomes more perhaps a security issue, but the threat assessment and security components of this are working together. And what the statistical problem, if you will, which is another reason people come to folks like us, is there's a great deal of false positives, a great number of false positives. Lots of people who are angry and make threats and have firearms and are really bitter and hateful, and maybe with some mental symptoms, not mental illness per se. That's not the issue. It's what are the acute symptoms, like violent delusions, for instance. But of all the people who come to attention, we're trying to go through this haystack and figure out who is most likely to have actual intent. They are motivated to act violently, and it's worth the price of their freedom or their life. So we're looking for that homicidal, suicidal connection. I have nothing to lose. I'm going down. I'm taking you with me for how you've disrespected me. And so we're looking for levels of severity, levels of concern, low, moderate, high, imminent, and trying to find the real hot ones within that haystack so that organizations don't waste time on the so-called nothing burgers, and also that they do not discriminate unfairly against somebody who is, say, odd or weird or did lose his temper, but there's a lot of protective factors. The guy has a family, has a conscience, he doesn't want to get into trouble, he backpedals, he apologizes, or he's just a confused individual, but he's not going to harm anyone. So you're assessing things so that the organization can make objective assessments, okay? And you gather data, you gather on-the-ground information about people, just background checks and doing collateral interviews. So I understand this guy better. And you look at their social media presence and you decide how deeply to go with a case. Some cases take an hour and some take a year or longer. And so there's that ongoing assessment and then the response. And then we consider, well, what could we do to learn more, and also keeping in mind that things should be have this attitude of trying to diffuse the situation. So I might interview somebody at the right time after gathering a lot of information and say, look, I've been asked to talk to you. He knows that already. As you know, I've been asked to talk to you about some things you said or did that have raised concern. Help me understand this. What's your perspective? Okay. And then they understand it's not confidential, and they'll start talking. and they'll talk about how they've been treated unfairly, or they might say things that are more reassuring, like, yeah, I lost my temper, or I made people scared, but I'm not playing for keeps. I just I'm not going to go there. I have a family, etc. But I mean, those are good endings. But you're gathering information that then informs the decisions you make about what to do and what not to do. Like somebody makes a threat, and the inexperienced people say, "Oh, for heaven's sake, let's call the police. Let's get a protective order. Let's surround the building with armed security people." And they have gathered very little data, and they've amped up and they're going to war, and it just agitates the whole situation. Now, there are situations that are dire, and it's all about tactical response. But that's the science and the art of this is sorting so that it's a focused assessment, and then that informs the range of interventions from doing nothing to getting people prosecuted and incarcerated. Plain hardball. You go from 0 to 100 in the response, and it's ongoing. So that's a kind of a long-winded answer to your question.
It's a good answer, and I think one of the points that I've learned over the period of time is around when you do have that problem individual, not rushing to sack them, because of course if you then do that, you don't get the opportunity to then interview them potentially.
Right, they're gone, and you can't interview them. The law enforcement can, and we work with law enforcement. They're learning the same things we are over the last 30 years. But yeah, the hasty termination is the number one mistake that organizations make. Hey, I'm the CEO. I'm responsible for keeping the place safe, so I need to get him out of here. Well, you just kicked him to the curb. You sacked him, and now you've rubbed it in his face. Well, what am I supposed to do? You're supposed to slow down. There are emergencies, but let's just slow down and let's gather info for the next hour or so, and then I'll give you my impression, and we'll talk about the options and things like that. Because the fear. I didn't quite finish this part, but people are so afraid of terrible things happening, and especially at the schools. These terrible school shootings of little kids. So everybody wants active shooter training, and that's the last step.
Yeah,
and it doesn't work very well, and the training erodes, and it makes people anxious. And there's 2/3 of these people who eventually do these things leak out their intent. They tell a coworker, tomorrow's the day, you should stay home, but keep watching CNN. So they have to be strategic and be quiet, but at the same time, they can't help themselves. They spill it out. They spill out that they're thinking about it. You want people to know, and it makes them feel good that they've got this plan. I'm empowered now. I'm going to show everybody. I'm going to flip the power structure. And they leak out these things, and that's what we're going after. But the people immediately get afraid. So what we say to organizations is the reason for having these programs proactively is, number one, for safety. And they say, well, it doesn't happen very often, but it could happen anywhere. Nobody's immune. But the second reason is, even if the risk is low, the risk of disruption and fear is high with anything. And the place can get into chaos quite quickly. And employees and others, if people are afraid of being harmed, and you don't show up with recognition of that and some sort of protocol, they're going to get angry. And it affects morale and productivity. If you're a cashier at a supermarket, a female, you're 10 feet away from the door, and her ex-husband or boyfriend can come right into that store and attack her. And she's scared to have that job. And there's lots of people in those jobs where, they're just very vulnerable where there's public access. So that's, it's like you got to get there and you got to show people you know what you're doing and that you're confident and you're competent and you're not going away until things are resolved as much as they can be.
So you mentioned
that's the specialty.
I mean, you mentioned about obviously the US companies that obviously are understandably concerned about the active shooter. And on this week we've had, I think, a child of 6 shooting his teacher, which is just extraordinary.
Yeah.
What are the fears that your clients outside of the US express? What are they worried about?
Well, it's interesting, and I know you've interviewed our good friend Bram Vandermeer, and Bram invited Reid and I to do a training with the Netherlands National Police a number of years ago, and it was just really a pleasure to work with them. But as Bram says, you can't hang on a sign that says, "Hey, I'm a violence risk expert and I'll help you prevent homicides in your organization." He says it doesn't work. And what people like him do and what organizations present is that, we have trouble with conflict. We have mobbing, we have, gang bullying. We have assaults, we have knife attacks, we have intimate partner violence issues that creep into the workplace. But they don't categorize it as violence risk. They say, we got problems with people getting along and they're kind of angry. And then people like Bram go in there and start listening, and they'll uncover situations that really involve intimidation and fear of violence, possibly violence. But you come at it from a different angle, and it isn't as severe, but it's there. But it's not framed the same way as in the USA. It's more about conflict, bullying, intimidation, mental symptoms. Because mental illness is mental illness, and may have different manifestations. But if there's violent ideas and fixation with violent themes, then it's the same thing.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, totally, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's such an interesting point, isn't it? Because when we hear the term workplace violence, for instance, in the UK. Yeah. People often don't resonate with that particularly because they think, well, we don't really have violence in the way that others do. But I think it's the same thing. It's just semantics about how you label it.
And then there's really significant cultural differences. Like some languages or cultures, there's no word for stalking. There isn't a word for it. That's just the way it is. In heavily patriarchal societies, men have their way. There's aggressive courtship rituals, and that would be considered harassment in the USA. In some ways, we're advanced with all our laws about stalking and abuse of women and all. But in other cultures or other countries, it isn't seen that way. And there's those differences.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think certainly in Europe, we experience a huge amount of immigration from, North Africa and the Middle East and that part of the, in what have you. And so we've seen some of these issues particularly playing out in Germany.
You do. And you have the domestic terrorism issue. I mean, Europe has a deeper history with terrorism than we do, but the violent extremists, right-wing, racially motivated extremism, those happen many places. So that's a similarity.
Yeah, and of course, we've just had the anniversary, haven't we, here, or you have rather, I should say, of the the 6th from what happened a year or so ago. But so let's move on to the waiver 21, because I think that's a really important thing that people perhaps may not be familiar with. So, I mean, what is waiver 21?
Waiver 21 is an acronym. The full name of the instrument is Workplace Assessment of Violence Risk. 21 refers to the 21 indicators, 19 of which are risk factors for targeted violence in organizational settings. There's one item that is the protective factor. We could have had three or four, but it's the good news. The good news. The guy has things to live for. And then the last item is not a risk or protective factor. It's a case impact factor that we included because it's relevant, as I've been saying, and it's the degree of disruption and fear created by any scenario, regardless of the objective opinion of risk. And so that helps people keep track of that. Like, people are staying home. Their family members are calling and saying, why don't you do something about that terrible bully? You know, the people are upset. They're all focused on talking about this. Nothing's getting done, and they're afraid. So we have that. Now, the waiver, Reid Meloy and I asked him to help me with this way back in 2005, after I had been working I'd been in organizations for, 25 years anyway. But we started the threat work in 1990. So after 15 years of doing threat work, I wanted to develop an instrument, a guide. And the waiver is an example of what are known as structured professional judgment guides, or SPJs. And they are not quantitative instruments. They're not like they're not a psychological test. There's no number that you get from 0 to 100 that somebody's going to attack you. But SPJs have really come into prominence now as this is the state of the assessment technology, that you have an instrument with risk factors for violence, as well as protective factors in certain settings, like sexual violence or spousal assaults or stalking risk profile. These are all instruments that are for use with different kinds of potential violence or context. And the waiver is one to use in a workplace setting. And all of the items, all of the risk factors have some association that's shown with research and case studies and professional practice to have either a clear statistical association with eventual violence, or they're items that are highly relevant. Item relevance may not show a statistical relationship, but it's a very important thing to understand. Like, the waiver includes an item number 4 is access to firearms. And it means access in a troubled context. We're not trying to get rid of everybody owns a gun. The country would be empty. So, but we include in that item not only that they have access and proficiency, but also brought a firearm to work. There are people who bring a firearm to work. If I'm Charlie Security and somebody says, Joe brought a gun to work, security is going to be there right now, because we don't know what it means. What it usually means is the guy wanted to show it to a coworker, or he's pushing the boundaries. He thinks it's his right to bring it, okay? Or he forgot, or he wanted something delivered at work because he wanted to get it rather than at home. So this gets discovered, and there's an inquiry. And statistically, vast majority of the time, it's nothing. It's stupid behavior. However, who wants to miss the situation where a guy is bringing it in with intent to harm. So it's not a very good predictor, but it's incredibly relevant, right?
But it's about context, isn't it?
It's about context. It's about context. And we wanted security people and others to understand, look for somebody doing that, okay? Now there's SPJs, structured professional judgment guides. They're not actuarial instruments. It's not like how insurance companies figure out what to charge for insuring a 19-year-old versus a 50-year-old, okay? Guess who's more at risk statistically, okay? But we don't have those numbers. But we know what to look for. We know there's lots of false positives, and that's the work. But the SPJ keeps you on track. It's a map. It says, this is what you should be looking for. You should be looking for paranoid delusions. You should be looking for threats. You should be looking for loss, acute loss or accumulated loss. Targeted violence is a lot about loss. I'm going to lose my job. My wife is divorcing me. My mortgage is upside down. I don't see a good future. I don't like how they're treating me. This is not good. You know, the world sucks and I'm going to have something to say about it. I'm not going to be a helpless victim. So we're looking for those things. And one unique item in the waiver, because it's for workplaces or universities, is extreme job or academic attachment. So the guy says, you can't fire me. I'm the best engineer you've ever had. I have no future. I'm lost. You can't. My family sent me from across the world to go to this famous university in America. I can't fail here. You have to understand, I don't have any other choice. I can't go home. I'll be shamed. Which is an emotion we look for. And it's a social emotion. It's socially mediated. Shame is, real or imagined audience looking down on you as defective, as not a member of the community. It's isolating. So the student who says, I can't go home, he's trapped. He's psychologically trapped. So that's the bind. We're looking for people who are in that bind. And so the waiver, and by the way, we had a second edition in 2010 and a third edition in 2016, which was greatly expanded to include more campus material. Now, a highly relevant item in campus context is alcohol abuse and use. That's one of the reasons you go to college. You go to parties, and they emphasize heavy drinking and scoring. Okay, do I have to tell you what scoring is? Anyway, so that's a different context. That's part of the culture. An organization's culture and the nature of their business influences the definition of their risk landscape. Okay, if I'm a public utility, I have to deal with terrorists wanting to attack my electrical grids because they're trying to start a revolution by disrupting the infrastructure. Okay, so that, because of the nature of my business, that's a risk factor I have. If I'm an academic setting and I've got foreign students or from America who are sent to school to bring pride to the family and they fail, those are contextual or cultural issues that go into an assessment of an individual.
We have very similar issues in the UK. We have students that come to, as you'll be aware, some of our significant universities here. And again, if they're, there's the financial contribution that their family have made and the sacrifice and all that sort of stuff, and there's the reputation and what have you, and a slightly different story, but an interesting way of looking at it is, I don't know if you're familiar with the Gurkha soldiers. So these are these soldiers that come from the mountains of Nepal. And they're an elite part of the British Army. But what they had to do was they have these training camps every year where all these young boys travel from various parts of Nepal to this British Army training camp. And to fail was considered to be shameful for your family.
Yeah.
And so over the ravines.
Universal risk factor.
Yeah.
That's a universal human situation. Go ahead.
So on the ravines, as you kind of approach the training camps, that they had big nets and what have you, because of course traditionally what these young boys did was throw themselves off the ravine rather than go home in shame. So it's the same emotion, different context perhaps, but it's the same issue in terms of.
Oh, it's the same. Yeah, no, it's the same issue, and it reminds me of not a clinical factor, but there's the ethical concept of honor and dishonor, and it's not something you measure. But I've talked about it and read about it, and we bring it into training. It's like, what is honor for a man? And honor is there's the implication that you have mastered or are mastering something of importance. You're doing something worthy, okay? And you are honored by a peer group qualified to say, this is an honorable guy, okay? He's pursuing a good path. He's respected. He's getting somewhere. That's a good thing. He's a provider. Okay. This is another issue we have here. People losing jobs on large scales. And so if I fail in that, I'm dishonored. The peer group does not reflect back to me that I'm an honorable person, and we're very hard on people who lose out in the workforce in these large numbers. And this is one of the reasons. This is an attraction to the conspiracy theory groups and extremism, because on the internet you can find a new group, a community that you will belong to, who will restore your honor. You can be one of us. And we know things that other people don't know. And we have explanations for why you got screwed. And we're going to do something about it, or talk like we're going to do something about it. So all of a sudden I'm emboldened. I belong. And if you look at the histories of people who get attracted to these extremist groups, there's very often a very hard life. They've had losses, rejections, failures, and some of it's their own doing, but also there's social factors. I mean, we have not been very good to the blue collar workers here in the last 50 years. And now we're paying for it. So with the internet, amplifying all these alternatives to just being a nobody in a trailer somewhere in the mountains, drinking and looking at your firearms.
And
that makes sense.
That brings in the kind of incel community as well, doesn't it? In that same context around a disenfranchised group of people who feel dishonored or disrespected, or what have you.
Yeah. They're the incel, the involuntary celibates, mostly young men. Now, to be fair, the vast majority they do not endorse violence, but they have a belief that they put all the blame on the women, and women are dehumanized, and they're seen as, sex is rejected, except for procreation and continuing the population. But you get a belief that validates you, a belief system that validates you, that what's wrong is outside of you, not inside of you. In courtship and dating, those are difficult things for a lot of people. It's stressful. And in adolescence, it's hard, and there's pressure to have a relationship or to have sex or whatever. And if it's not happening, then you can get depressed and unhappy. And then somebody speaks to you like, what's really going on? And we see those cases in workplace scenarios, as well as, there's a fair number of cases that involve some level of paranoia, an irrational fear of malicious intent from others, that they are going to attack you. And we're very concerned about the paranoid individual who arms himself or even herself, waiting for that persecutor to show up. I'm going to be ready if they come for me, or I'm even going to attack them before they come to me. And it's all delusional. And it's a serious problem, and they can be secretive, even though they leak things out. So you have that, but the point I want to make is the paranoid individuals functioning, they're not just babbling psychotically. They have jobs, but they're suspicious and mistrustful and humorless, and they keep journals about coworkers they think are up against them. And what happens is now that we get cases where they've been on these websites that are a convention of paranoid people, and the message is, you're right. There really is a virus coming through the ventilating system. People really are hacking your computer. You're not crazy. You're not paranoid. It's other people really doing these bad things to you. So you have this messaging. The internet's great for buying a shirt without having to go downtown, but there's a lot that's not so good. But it's like you have these counter narratives that reinforce people's beliefs and make them feel like they belong. Now, I before our times, I gotta say one more thing about the waiver, and we can come back to these other things. But the waiver is a map, but you always will need your professional judgment or your clinical judgment if you're a clinician. You have 21 factors on the waiver. Well, this case so far looks like we have 7 or 8 factors. Okay, so, but then how do we put that all together? How do we see the dots, identify the dots, connect the dots, and interpret the dots? See, and that's the computer between your ears. And that's the judgment that's necessary in this work that comes with increasing experience, of course. The more cases you do, the more you understand all these nuances. I look back on my career and I realized, how uncertain I was and how uncertain the people around me were who were doing this work. We just had the guts to jump in and try to figure it out. And then eventually you get more competent. But the judgment and the dynamics among the people doing the work on the team, that matters. Some people are great at it. Some people are not. Some people are very black and white. He did this, we do that. No. Nope, we're going to do it this way. And it's that influences the whole process. So we look for people to be on these teams who play well in the sandbox, have good judgment, they're stable, they're resilient, they're willing to be in a hot kitchen and respect other people and to speak up. And that's the team dynamic. We've learned from studies of airline cockpit crews and surgical teams. Some nurse didn't speak up when the doc was about to cut the wrong thing, or the co-pilot was afraid to speak up to the captain. And those studies influence this kind of work. It's like you gotta speak truth to power.
Do you foresee a time? Do you foresee a time, Stephen, where artificial intelligence and machine learning will take over this and be able to sort of you feel like you tick all your boxes on your waiver, and it comes up and tells you what you should do?
Well, I suppose so, because it's all over. I'm not an expert in that area, but everything I see seems to say like we're all going to be replaced by an intuitive robot. I don't know, but sure. I mean, there is great work going on with the cyber field about this, and how much more can we improve things by using complex algorithms and all. And it's fine. What we do is we use things that help. Like the physician takes your temperature, he takes your heartbeat, he does all these different things, takes your history, and he puts it all together to tell you how sick you are, what to do. And whatever's helpful, but you also recognize the limitations of certain things. Like if we have a case, but we never got to interview the guy, we're not going to be as confident in our opinion as we would if we did do an interview, et cetera. So if AI may help, I'm sure it will. It'll be interesting to see as time goes on, but I certainly can't speak to the details of the research that's going on. But I'm sure there'll be a contribution.
Yeah. It's for me. It's always been about context, and everything you have to deal with is context, and so that's where the judgment comes in. Because if you're just ticking boxes, along it, and it comes up,
you can't check boxes. We tell people that, but at least they have a map. If I'm in San Francisco and I want to go to New York, I don't. If I just get in a car and start driving east, I don't know when or where I'll wind up.
Yeah.
But if I have a road map, I say, okay, it says to get on this highway.
Yeah.
But it doesn't tell me that it's going to snow in Missouri.
Yeah.
Or that the road is out in, Illinois, unless I have data systems that show me that. Or, gee, should I keep driving after 5 p.m. because I've been driving since 6 a.m. So I'm kind of tired. I have to make a judgment.
But we're looking at, aren't we? We're looking at behaviors fundamentally.
Yeah, behaviors and motive. The bottom line is, who's motivated to act violently, to make a point, to solve a problem, to end pain, to bring attention to something, to get revenge? Who's motivated to do that, knowing that it's going to cost them their life or their freedom? And they're willing to pay that price. It's like the violence is, this goes back to DeBecker and others. It's like, I have an issue, and the alternatives to solving it do not work for me. Legal or just working, getting over it, mourning, whatever. None of those work for me. I've been humiliated. The violence is justified, and I'm willing. I have the means to do it. I have the capacity to do it. And I'm willing to pay the price. See, I'm looking for the guy who, for whom violence is a restoration of pride. James Gilligan is a psychiatrist who studied the worst murders in prison, and he done some very good writing. But he said, in his opinion, violence is an attempt to overcome unbearable feelings of shame and replace it with pride. I killed a bunch of people. You have to respect me now. You have to pay attention and respect me now. I'm gone, but I'm living on in the internet with all the other antiheroes, and it's a logical decision for me, and I'm fine with it. And that's the scenario that we hope is not present, but what we're looking for.
Can we just touch briefly on the pathway to violence, because it's something that I think is a fantastic model. And can you just talk about that in terms of how that fits into the waiver and your work about this journey?
The pathway originally ideas from the U.S. Marshals and great writing by Ted Calhoun and Steve Weston, and then further developed by a lot of others. But it's the pathway shows how someone gets from a grievance, a very broad sense of grievance, to an attack. Okay, and the thing that I tell people is, if you're going to kill somebody, it's a project. You have to plan it. I mean, there's impulsive violence, but then there's predatory, targeted, planned violence. There's emotions with it, but not during the attack. Those are all under control. You have to, if you think about, okay, I'm going to kill somebody. How am I going to do that? Let's see. I have to get access. I have to figure out how to do it. I have to have a good reason, because it's the end. And that's it's all got to be figured out. And some pathways, they go, it starts with a grievance. It's very general. Some of it's very specific. You fired me. But then there's all the backdrop that says, I can't tolerate these kinds of things. I've been putting up with it my whole life. but it could just be I'm a young man, I'm marginalized, I'm going nowhere, everybody else is, my life's a dead end, I'm depressed, I have no friends. Well, this will show people. And so there's the grievance. There's loss, anger, humiliation, and blame. Okay. And blaming is very big in this. Okay. So we've all had grievances. We've all been rejected. We've all had disappointments, but we get over it. It's part of growing up and maturing, and you can think back on things and get all upset again, but you get over it. You get on with it, more or less. The next step, though, is violent ideas. And we've all had fantasies where we, things we think about doing that we're not going to do, but they make us feel good. Gee, it would feel good if that girl who rejected me in high school, if her next boyfriend would reject her and hurt her feelings, that would feel good to me. But I'm not going to do anything about that. But so the violent ideas boost esteem and people hold on to them. It's like, this feels kind of good. Okay. And they may nurture it. Okay. It could be a very quick pathway or years in developing. I go from that to violent ideas. And then I start to think about the actual preparation and the planning. Okay. The planning, the details, the sitting down and figuring it all out, so to speak. And then you go to the next stage of, okay, it's time to go practice at the firing range. I got to get a weapon or another weapon, the one I want to use for this attack, as opposed to hunting or target shooting. And I got to get competent and practice. Okay, I got to figure out where everybody's going to be. Where's a target-rich place? Am I going to go to a mall where there's lots of people and targets will be easy? Am I going to go to the team meeting at work where I was humiliated by my supervisor? I'm going to go into that same meeting and I'm going to kill everybody there. So I'm thinking of the place, the time, the method, how I'm going to keep secrecy. At the same time, I'm leaking out. As Paul Gill says, these guys can't help themselves. They just got to tell somebody. They're not Navy SEALs. They don't know about operational secrecy very good. They're sloppy. Their guns jam, But of course, they do great, terrible harm. So then there's that final preparation for the attack. And maybe there's these can be very subtle, the goodbye nuances. The guy who calls his mother and says, "Mom, I just want you to know I love you." And it's July the 20th. It's not Mother's Day. It's not her birthday. Why is he calling me? Why? He never does this, He usually forgets Mother's Day. Now he's telling me he loves me. Wonder what's going on. Well, he's saying goodbye, Elliot Rodger, the Isla Vista mass murderer, I wrote a case study of him. He didn't say goodbye to people, and they knew he was suicidal, and they were worried about him, but he videotaped visiting parks and public parks where nostalgically that he really enjoyed was when he was a kid. He said, "There's the swing. There's the jungle gym. Boy, this was so nice when I did this as a little boy." He was saying goodbye. And if you only saw that video, you wouldn't get it. But if you had other contextual information going, he's saying goodbye. We need to get there.
We had a terrorist in the UK a few years ago now, who when I was working in the Houses of Parliament, who attacked Parliament, and killed one of our colleagues. And one of the interesting things he did was he went and saw his mother, who he was estranged from. And when he left her, he said, "They're going to say I'm a terrorist, but I'm not."
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I always sort of say, if I said that to my mum as I'm leaving the house, my mum's thinking, "What the hell are you on about?" But it was him saying goodbye to her, and he was estranged, and he turned up to say goodbye, and they're going to say things about me, but they're not true.
Yeah, and an interesting point here is that sometimes families are the ones who stop these things. The thwarted attacks. They can see their father, their husband, their son going sideways, and they'll plead with him, or they'll call in and say, we're worried about our son. And we appreciate that they call. We say, thank you. We don't want anything to happen to your son or anybody else. So let's do something about this, because they're afraid you're going to just hammer the guy. I mean, it all depends, but families they're a wild card, but they can be a great help in these situations. But so that's the pathway. And we're looking for those indicators that people have the motive, they have the capacity, and they have the opportunity, the last stage, which things are shifting from assessment to tactical response. And
does it have to end in violence?
Be diffused.
Does it have to end in violence, or could they go on the same pathway with the end objective to cause mass disruption rather than mass violence?
Yeah, they could just want to sabotage and cause disruption. Case many years ago, a guy who took his wife to a company party, and a coworker flirted with her, and they wound up having an affair. She had an extramarital affair, and the husband, the cuckolded husband, sent out this mass email telling everybody in the company what a rat this guy was. And I interviewed him, and I said, help me understand what's going on. He was a decent guy. He was terribly hurt. And he said, I just wanted to ruin this guy's reputation. That's all, Doc.
Yeah.
I'm not going to kill him. And if they fire me, okay, I'm willing to pay that price. Yeah. See, it's like, what was he trying to accomplish?
Yeah. Well, he felt humiliated.
And I felt empathy for him.
Yeah. He's humiliated, isn't he? And he's responding to that.
He's humiliated, and he was trying to correct that. Yeah. And I understood that. And I could help the company understand that, so that they don't mislabel him as, oh God, he's going to go on and do what the guy did last week at some post office or other organization. No. You want to understand what's at stake and what price people will pay or not pay. And frankly, you save some people from being discriminated against. And the lawyers like that. They like a due process of objective assessment and fairness. And the workforce will, the word will get around. This protocol, it's pretty good. These guys know what they're doing, and they're respectful, and women aren't afraid to bring forward that their ex-boyfriend's threatening them at work, because they don't want to lose their job. Mm-hmm. They're embarrassed, all of that. And as long as they cooperate with our investigation, then we're good. Mm-hmm. Not going to lose your job. It's not your fault. He's a so-and-so. So anyway, that's the pathway. And we're looking for people we're looking for ambivalence. I'm thinking about it, but I don't want to do it. I'm thinking about it, but no, I don't want to do it. Can we bring them down? Can they bring themselves down or not? It's like, nope, I'm on the way, and it feels great.
Stephen, I could carry on talking to you all night, but I'm conscious that your time is precious, and you've given us nearly an hour of it already. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you. It's been a real privilege for me just to sit here and chat with you for the last hour and our previous conversation as well. I'm so grateful for you for coming on this podcast. It's going to be invaluable to the listeners to hear your thoughts and your wisdom on this subject.
Well, I certainly appreciate being invited, Philip. It was grand talking to you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing in these podcasts, and I've listened to several, and it's really a cool thing. So I thank you, and the next time I'm in London, I expect you to take me to your favorite pub.
Absolutely.
And we'll have a pint together.
It'll be my privilege. Yeah, definitely. Well, Stephen, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that.
Okay.
And
all right.
It'll be out very soon.
Okay, very good, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Online Bodyguard podcast with host Philip Grindell, CEO and founder of Diffuse. Please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platforms.